Hello, folks. I'm David Takitaki. I am a political scientist, but the video I am making right now is me speaking on my own as a citizen, as an educated one, but as an individual. I do not speak on behalf of any of the causes I have previously represented, any of the institutions in which I am employed, any of the associations of which I am a member. This is me. And I say those things, that disclaimer, because I'm proposing something very new and potentially very hard, but at the same time, very necessary. So, to get there, to provide the background and the foundation for this idea, this plan I have promised, we need to talk a little bit about politics. It is simultaneously the most important and most difficult topic to be discussing in today's environment. And our politics is broken. Our political systems have been shifted in many ways fundamentally from the way in which most of us think they should be operating. And so before I can bring you to the point that I arrived at when I conceived this plan, let's talk a little bit about our politics. We have a system in which most of our elected representatives, especially those elected to either the House of Representatives or the Senate, are elected in first past the post single member districts. What that does is it creates a scenario in which you have two parties. Not because two parties are coded into the laws or into the Constitution, but because a process documented by a political scientist named Duverger, referred to frequently as the Duverger effect, creates incentives for individuals to align behind one candidate or another till they get a majority, till they get to 50%. And if you've got one group that has come together and has achieved 50% of the vote plus one, and therefore are getting victories in terms of electing people to that seat, then the alternative is for everyone else to get together on the other side, assemble 49.9% of the population, and then fight over the middle. It's not inherent to our Constitution, it's inherent to the system. It's part of the math that we end up with these two parties. Which also means that things like district manipulation, gerrymandering can cause scenarios in which our elected officials, the population of our elected officials, can be wildly out of step with the positions and the opinions and sometimes even the values of the people who actually elect them. It's not surprising that as parties, as individuals move these lines around, seeking power, seeking office, and moving the general disposition of our elected officials away from the general disposition of the vast majority of their constituents, that creates disincentives to participation, that we as a population feel like they are increasingly out of touch, that you almost see an entirely separate political class form. And as that continues, it does not increase the likelihood that the average person is going to get involved. In fact, that gerrymandering process shifts the burden of elections from the big general election in which everyone participates increasingly towards partisan primaries. And in those primaries, frequently, the most ardent partisans, the people who have the strongest opinions and sometimes the most extreme opinions, are the ones that show up. They turn out, they elect people who think like they do, and then when the general election comes around, people are left wondering, how did we get this candidate? How did we get that one? Can't we do better than this? This process creates political polarization. It creates disincentives for average people to participate in the system. And it's part of the math. But it's also exacerbated by things like misinformation. We live in an age that's increasingly connected by the internet, in which we have so many different sources of potential information that you can choose, to a great extent, what kind of news you want to hear if you choose to hear news at all. That can be a wonderful thing for the dissemination of information, but it also can dramatically exacerbate one of the bad tendencies that exist in media. We hope that media is here to inform us, right? We hope that they are here to be the watchers on the wall, to be the folks who are, giving us the information we need to make informed decisions as voters. And sometimes that's true. Old standards of journalistic ethics and important people who enter that field do, in fact, want to perform that function. But most media outlets are also for-profit industries, meaning that they want to sell papers or magazines or get viewers for their advertisers or get clicks on the internet. And so, sometimes they're more interested in revenue generation than they necessarily are in providing that kind of information to the public. If you've been paying attention to some of the issues going on even within these media organizations, and some of them are the most storied and reliable media organizations that are available in the United States, you'll see that tug of war happening, sometimes between ownership, sometimes if there are shareholders involved. It's a situation in which profitability, clicks, engagement might conflict with truth-telling, especially if that truth maybe doesn't make certain moneyed or political interests look that good in that particular moment. It can be a problem. And so when people are getting not only potentially different information, but sometimes bad information, that makes these problems and divisions and polarization worse. Going further than just bad information, misinformation can be sown into our political discourse, into our media environment. Falsehood can be an incredibly effective political weapon. If you can make people believe things that are not true, you can get them to do things that they might not otherwise do. And if you want them to do those things, sometimes people are willing to tell those lies. That's a problem for our society. It's a big problem for our democracy. But you don't need necessarily to lie to manipulate the political system. Sometimes you just need to be the loudest voice in the room. And in an era in which paid advertising or platforming can be the way in which you're the loudest voice in the room, what that often means is that whoever has the most money has the most say. Now, thankfully, we still work in a system in which money cannot directly translate to votes. But money can motivate individuals to vote. But it can also, and frequently does, demotivate people to vote. In a cynical age, it's so much easier to be against something than it is to be for something. And so if someone can take that interesting new candidate who seems to be doing good works or has good ideas and slander them or paint them in a negative light, whether it's true or not, some folks are happy to kind of shrug their shoulders and go, they're all the same. They're all crooks. No reason for me to support this person. And so they stay home. They don't get off the couch. They don't learn anymore. The same hyper-partisan folks show up at the primaries. They elect candidates that represent their interests, and we're all back in the same position in the general election, wondering how we ended up with these choices. And some of us don't choose either. Some of us shake our fist at the system and we go home. And not only does the system get further and further away from our ideas and our values, but nothing changes. Nothing moves positively. Just keeps kind of sliding down. We also have to remember that this history we have with ourselves, with our own policies, and specifically with the two major parties, it doesn't cease to exist when we idealize American politics. Even I, as a teacher, have to acknowledge it doesn't cease to exist. We frequently approach politics kind of like a team sport. And sometimes our animosity, our identity, shapes how we see other people and other ideas. There are circumstances where you can present someone with an incredibly useful idea, and they might even begin to think that idea is a good idea. But if you then tell them that that idea came from someone on the other side of the political spectrum, you'll watch their support for that idea drop. That's problematic. This isn't just a rivalry scenario, right? This is governance. This is policy. This is the future of the country. And so we can't pretend like generations of folks going, oh, those Republicans are nothing but heartless people, or, oh, those Democrats, they're just communists. If you grew up in a family that thought like that, if you've been tuned into media that's been actively characterizing and vilifying or elevating and lionizing one of those two groups over and over and over again, it can be really hard for you to say, you know what, maybe we need to listen to those folks. Maybe we need to hear what they have to say. Or, you know what, that's actually not a bad idea. We can't pretend like that's not a real thing in our political discourse. This factionalism, right? Even more than partisanship. Factionalism splits us and divides us, takes options off of the table because we can't see a world in which someone on the other side of that line might actually be a good person having our best interests at heart. Many Americans of varying ideologies are frustrated. And that's in no small part because the character of our system and our process, the output of that process, what we're actually seeing in terms of laws and policies, is unacceptable to us. It's antithetical to our values. I share those frustrations. And one of the things that I am in a position as a political scientist to point out is that what we're seeing right now isn't an anomaly. It is the natural product of the process, of the cumulative decisions that have been made to build the system the way it sits today. This is what this system will create. Between the first past the post elements, to the open nature of political spending and advertising, to the access that lobbyists have, to the relatively freewheeling and disparate partisan structures, this is what the system creates when you build it like this. And so we need to think very, very strongly about what that system is and what it isn't. It doesn't represent our values. Most of us would want honesty and character to matter for someone who is trying to lead us, who is seeking a position of public trust. Are honesty and character really promoted in the system as it stands today? I might argue no. At the end of the day, we see this process pushing people through these really extreme partisan primaries. And we see candidates with long histories of immoral, dishonest, criminal behavior from both parties moving through those primaries, being selected for leadership. Because the process does not emphasize honesty and character. The process frequently emphasizes electoral success. And people who have money and connections can gain electoral success. There are lots of us in everyday life who are honest. Lots of us have good character. But the system isn't picking us for those things. No one's knocking on your door and saying, you are an excellent citizen and a wonderful person. We think you should come out and lead. Whose doors are getting knocked on? People with fame. People with resources. It is a natural product of the system the way we have designed it. What about the product of the system, right? Do we look for people who in their electoral world can deliver policy that really helps everyday people, right? Well, you'd like to think that we do. But do we? Who gets reelected? Right? The people who deliver some kind of results for that base that comes out and votes for them in the primary, sometimes in a gerrymandered district. How do you deliver bases, elections for or results for that primary base? Sometimes it's through just being a fighter, just looking like you're fighting for their issues or fighting for their interests, whether or not you're actually having a positive effect. You have to win over the base. It's red meat, right? Sometimes people are successful because they can transfer blame, because they can say, yes, things are still bad, but it's their fault, and I'm here fighting for you against them. So, do people get reelected over and over again despite failing to deliver on these crucial policy points? Sometimes, yeah, right? Because once they're in that political arena, many folks are not interested in doing the really hard work that is required to make progress on these policy points. Sometimes even delivering on a policy that really does help people broadly requires the kind of compromise that would alienate them from those extreme voters in their primary and cause them to lose office. And if they are motivated by retaining office, which, Mayhew's old study says most of them are, then they are disincentivized to produce real results. That's a huge problem. But this is the system working as we have collectively built it. We shouldn't be surprised that this is what we're getting. Let's also think about something like centering political discussion on the issues, right? Everybody hates political conversation because most of the time it's the equivalent of just screaming at each other, right? I talk to students like, I want them to get engaged with the political process, but when they look out of my classroom door at the political process, they're like, this looks like people just throwing mud back and forth at each other. I want to walk into the mud fight. And that's true, right? We would love a political discourse that was really centered on issues, right? Where we can be talking about the kind of policies that either need to be retained in order to make sure that important parts of our society keep working right, or that need to be changed in order to get parts of our society to work right, or that need to be put in place so that we can anticipate what is coming in the future. Build something that's going to last, build something that means tomorrow is better than today. That's what most of us really want our politics to be about. But is that what we do? Is that what we seek out? Is that what we encourage? No. Most of us are not spending our time, if we are engaged with politics, debating the specific nuances of one policy versus another, really examining options in detail. And that, for most of us, is unsurprising, because most of us, across the board, have never received any kind of real civic education. Maybe you got a semester in high school, American government, right? They taught you how a bill became a law and they sent you on your way. That is a woefully inadequate education for the governance of one of the world's premier superpowers in the 21st century. So, of course, we're not tuned in. We're busy. We're bored. We're uninformed. Some of us are jaded, right? We don't engage with the nuances of policy. You get a politician or a leader who comes out and tries to talk to us about these nuances of policy, they'll get shouted off the stage by their own supporters sometimes. Why? What gets our attention? What do we tune into? Outrage, controversy, conspiracy, scandal. That's what gets our attention. Is it any surprise that some of our candidates, maybe more than we would like, are catering to those sensibilities? Is it any surprise that the angriest people in the room, the most polarized partisans who are simultaneously most animated and most likely to show up for those primary elections, is it any wonder that the politicians are catering more and more to those folks if those folks are critical to getting them elected in those gerrymandered districts? It shouldn't surprise us. This is what this system produces. It's built to produce this. What about, again, media, right? Think about what you do. How many of us are actively seeking out and patronizing sober, analytical media that is presenting issues in a way that informs voters so we can make the best decisions for our country and our states? A lot of us don't. What gets you to click on a story? What gets you to tune into a broadcast? What gets you to read something? Is it that it provides you with clearly presented, intricate information about policy dilemmas? Or is it that it feeds into the way that you already think about the world and makes you feel good? Paints the good guys as good guys and the bad guys as bad guys. For a lot of us, that's exactly what it is. If we're paying attention to media at all, if we're actually trying to do some element of self-education on these issues, if we're trying to stay informed, if we're trying to participate. As the last couple of election cycles show, there are tens of millions of us who just don't and just won't unless something changes. And so one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, does it have to be this way? And I believe that the answer to that question is no, it doesn't. But we have to start thinking about leverage. How can it change? And one of the issues is that we have a very negative connotation towards politics in general in this country. I ask my students to do a little exercise where I ask them, when I say the word football player, write down the first three words that come to mind. And some of them write down, like athletic or rich or, champion or whatever it is. And I'll say, what about doctor, right? And they'll put healer, and they'll put white coat maybe, or stethoscope. And then I ask them, politician. And it's almost always negative terms, right? I mean, some of them will put leader, right? But a lot of them will write corrupt, sleazy, right? They'll put out of touch. That's the general conception of our most critical system by people who are just now coming to an age in which they will become part of that system. Politics is nasty. I mean, in some ways it always has been. It's not as if yellow journalism and political scandal and bad actors are new to this age, right? But with the complexity that we're seeing, and with all of the different elements in which people can be misinformed, and as we're entering into an age of artificial intelligence and things like deepfakes, we deeply lack the capacity necessary to engage with these systems and with these issues. And there are strong motivations for political actors to discourage political participation. If they can get only the folks that they really want to come out and vote, they tend to win the results that they want. Remember, those actors are being put there by the extreme elements of many partisan processes, of course. They want the big middle to sit at home. That's how they win. There are also strong motivations for political actors to encourage that kind of select participation. So instead of coming out and telling us about specific details or specific policies or appealing to the broad swath of America that really just wants positive results, it's easier to come out and kind of bang the drum for outrage, paint the other folks as a threat. That gets your group to show up, even if it also poisons the pool in terms of how we think about one another. More than ever, these opportunities compound. It's not just happening through a newsletter or an ad in a newspaper. It's everywhere. It's in social media, and it's being amplified, sometimes by individuals, sometimes by bots, sometimes by, potentially hostile foreign actors who are interested in watching our government grind to a halt and become less effective on the world stage. All of this seems to lock up our politics. And it creates a scenario in which many of our public leaders aren't doing the job we need them to do, even under the best of circumstances. Think about what it takes to get elected in this country. What do you have to do to get elected? Well, you've got to win votes, right? You seek to win votes. People who want to be elections, even good folks, right, need to win votes to get there. Well, how do you win the votes? Well, in this system, what do you got to do? You got to win those primary elections, which means you have to appeal to those extremists. You've got to raise money. Where do you get the money? Who's got it? I generally don't have that much of it. Most working folks out there don't have a lot of it. Who's got bunches of money? Well, it's corporate interests, and it's the wealthy. So if I need that money in order to possibly get elected, even if I'm trying to get elected for the best of purposes, I have to somehow get them to give me that money. And so chances are I am making deals. I'm at the least sitting in rooms with them, listening to what they have to say, trying to get them to support me. Not sitting in rooms with the folks who are, waiting tables down at the diner, or the folks who are, mopping the floors at the high school. I am myself going out there, and I'm trying to create these connections. In many ways, the ways that our parties determine success is not as much about policy as it is about winning elections. And so if you want to win election, if you want to be a politician, if you want to be a representative or a senator or a mayor, your first job is as a candidate. And being a candidate is a very different job than being a leader or a representative or a senator or a mayor or a president. What do those jobs really require us to do? Do they require us to kind of appeal to the biggest extremes in our party for money and favors and votes? No, if you're going to do it right, it requires compromise. Does it require somebody who has, good television charisma and a knack for advertising and pithy social media? No, it requires diplomacy and the ability to negotiate. Deep skills when it comes to analyzing existing laws, making sure that new ones that are proposed aren't necessarily going to cause a big problem with what exists out there. It involves problem solving, looking at issues and problems and being able to say, hey, you know what, this is a novel way to fix it. Does it require the kind of pride and bravado that it takes to be a successful and trailblazing candidate out there in today's political sphere? No, sometimes it requires humility. Requires the ability to look around, right? And see, hey, you know what? Over there, it's not my idea, but that's a really good way to do this. Let's take from that and work with it. Requires being able to say, hey, look, I had this idea, and I thought it was good, but I've taken the time to think about it, and I've taken the time to realize your idea is better. It's better for the people. Let's do that. That's not the same skill set that we're looking for in terms of a candidate. That's not who we're voting for. And so with that divide stacked upon everything else, it should not surprise us. Again, we're getting the product of the system we designed. And that makes it really hard for us to change it. Because we have been going about attempting to change it largely in the wrong way. We have been trying to put individuals into this very, very broken system, at least by our values, broken, and charge them with changing it. Charge them individually sometimes with changing it. While all of the rest of these pressures, our own absence of participation and information and capacity for civic action, that doesn't change. The nature of the media and its for-profit elements, that doesn't change. The nature of the voting system with its numerical preferences, right, for these two parties, that doesn't change. We just kind of keep taking good folks and throwing them in there. And they try. A lot of them are good folks. They try. They get in for good reasons. And then they spend half of their time on the phone trying to raise funds so they can stay there and maybe get something good done. And it doesn't happen. And we get madder and madder, and they get sometimes further and further away from the reasons they originally signed up for this. And it keeps chugging along. Is this the way it is? Is there no way around it? Well, it can feel that way. But again, we've been going about trying to create this change in the wrong way. So where's the leverage, you're asking me, right? Well, now we're starting to get to the plan. People have talked about, do we need to pass laws that change campaign finance? We need to pass laws to move to other systems, things like ranked choice voting. Some of those are great ideas, but they have to process through a system in which many of the actors and many of the beneficiaries of the system are not going to be served by those changes, which is why many of them have not happened. Let's not get that twisted. So, okay, what about something like a third party? We've seen that popularized in recent days. I think just a couple of days ago, Elon Musk said he's starting a third party. All right, well, hopefully he understands that third parties are incredibly difficult to start. There are some pretty significant requirements that are in place around the country in order to get a party on the books. They're not impossible, but they're hard. And then third parties tend to create incentives towards things like strategic voting, right? Where people might say, this party over here, I kind of like what they're doing, but if I vote for them, or some of the people who like that vote for them, and that splits this side of the ticket, then the other party, who I really don't like at all, they're going to do really, really well. So I'm not going to support this other third party over here. I'm going to do this. And remember, this doesn't change the fundamental nature of the system. Even if a third party were to come about and be incredibly successful, it might succeed in displacing one of the two parties, right? People talked about that. Maybe the Tea Party would rise up and take over the Republican Party, and there would be a new party duality of the Democrats and the Tea Party. Or maybe it's the other side. It's the progressives. They would rise up and they would displace the Democratic Party, and there would be a new duality of the progressives and the Republicans. Or maybe they would both work, and you'd have the Tea Party versus the Progressive Party or something like that. Maybe that's how it would work. So a third party can come up and potentially displace one party or another, but it's incredibly unlikely. And it still leaves you in much the same scenario, in which, yes, that new party has come up and maybe it's achieved some electoral success, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the fundamentals of the system that have brought us to where we are and keep creating these bad results would change. So how can we, as Americans, do something? We don't have the power to directly change the elements of the electoral system without using the current system, right? We can't change the law without gaining office and becoming part of the system. And that's been unsuccessful. We can't, despite widespread agreement, I think, in the unacceptability of what's going on right now, we haven't been able to improve what we've got. So what do we have the power to change? Where is the leverage here? We have the power to change ourselves, right? We can do things differently. We have the power to change the ways in which we choose to interact with the system. That's something we can do. And it's with that in mind that my plan involves doing something that is pretty revolutionary, though completely legal, moral, and I think really, really important, because we can't change the system by simply electing one or two new people. We can't change the system by creating a third party. We can't change the system by crossing our fingers and hoping it changes. But we can, feasibly, recognize the structure of the system as it sits and not create a new candidate, not create a new political pack, not create a new political party, but create two, 2 new political parties. 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 2 new Why 2? Because we know that the vast majority of core and contentious issues that exist within the American political sphere are divided into camps that can roughly be described as progressive and conservative. If these parties are going to be successful, they are going to need to create a relatively easy off-ramp for existing partisans on either side to step out of those partisan structures and into these new ones. But if one party itself is really hard to create at all, and a third party is potentially problematic, why could creating 2 new parties be the answer? Here's the thing. American laws regarding political parties allow for those parties to have some pretty significant freedom in the creation of their bylaws. How those parties operate is largely up to the parties themselves and has been regularly reaffirmed by decisions regarding the First Amendment and the conduct of people in the political sphere. Most of us, most folks, don't really intellectually separate things like the partisan primary process from the general election process. And we've moved over the last 100 years into an era in which both of the current parties are actively trying to make these things seem very connected. Not only do they use the same infrastructure, but they market them in the same way. You're going to the same place you vote in November, the same place you vote in April or August. You fill out similar looking ballots, and it all seems like it is pretty much a fait accompli that these are the 2 parties that we have, and this is the way the system works. But that's not the way it has to work. So let me describe to you what could be done differently. If you had 2 parties, we'll call them the Redbirds and the Bluebirds for the moment, right? Redbirds, roughly conservative, Bluebirds, roughly progressive. You could create party structures that specified that candidates who wish to stand for election in either of those 2 parties to potentially qualify as candidates in one of those 2 parties have to meet a specific set of standards and behaviors. You cannot impose a new systematic change on the election system, right? But you, in terms of your party, can do things very differently. So, if someone has a significant history, let's say, of manipulation or misinformation, they could, by that party, be disqualified from winning that party's nomination. If we cannot change the way in which fundraising happens at the national level, right? We can put rules and prescriptions and prohibitions on the way in which candidates who operate within this new party structure do raise funds or do spend funds. I can't create a 60-day election cycle without making major changes to federal law. But if we say that the members of these 2 parties, after having been verified by the parties for their candidacy, can only campaign within 60 days of an election, we can do that. If we create language that locks these 2 parties together on core principles, and then requires candidates who are seeking to represent us through these parties to adhere to those principles, we, as the collective membership of this new party, can begin to change candidate behavior in ways that we cannot do elsewhere, where these various different misincentives and disincentives exist. If we say, you must be honest, you must be transparent, you must approach leadership as servant leadership, you are here to serve the people, right? If we say that you need to emphasize inclusive democracy, if you need to work towards prosperity, but universal prosperity, right? We can do that through this mechanism. If we say, we're interested in humanity and education and in civic citizenship, if we say, we want you to be diligent in your duties and promote peace abroad and at home, if we want to emphasize things like equality and liberty and justice, We can do that through these mechanisms. It is very common nowadays to not understand the way that the partisan structure works in this country, the way that political parties work in this country. The key, really, to political parties is that they can provide ballot access. They can put someone's name onto a ballot. And so, when the Democrats or the Republicans hold their primary elections, what they're really doing is figuring out who they're going to put on the ballot. We can do that too. The Redbirds and the Bluebirds can, and in my plan will, right, solicit opportunities for party members to run for offices. Ideally, for every office up for election in every election everywhere. And people of good standing, people who have not been part of the prior political machine, people who are new blood, new leadership, and who can agree on these core principles, can stand up and say, yeah, you know what, I lean conservative, but I believe in these principles, and I think we need to fix things. People who lean progressive can say, hey, you know what, we disagree on a whole bunch of stuff, but I agree on these core principles. And together, we can both stand for election. We can select. The Bluebirds can put up their candidate, and the Redbirds can put up their candidate. And as the people around the country go to vote in the general election, yes, there will be a Republican candidate on the ticket, and there will be a Democratic candidate on the ticket. There'll be a Bluebird and a Redbird as well. Along with, hopefully, green parties and all sorts of different folks. And so now the strategic voting works very differently. Because the question becomes, if you are someone who is traditionally conservative, and you're somebody who is traditionally progressive, do you want a candidate that aligns with your values? Of course you do. But the difference is that you know what kind of results you're seeing from the Republicans, and you know what kind of results we are seeing for the Democrats. Sometimes they move it in the direction you want. Sometimes they're ineffective at resisting bad movements you don't want. But they're not bound by these principles. They're not bound by these ideas. They're not committed to honesty and transparency and servant leadership the same way the Redbirds and the Bluebirds are. They are not connected to the other party in terms of this alliance of parties. They are the status quo. They are the thing that we have been dissatisfied with. Or you can vote for one of the two new parties. And know that these candidates are committed to not doing things the old way. They are not beholden to special interests. Why? Because part of the rules for each of these parties say they can't take special interest money. They are not going to be the same folks who have already been manipulated by special interests. Why? Because those folks are not allowed to stand for election in these new parties. Not that some of them aren't great people, but America needs a change. We need to move past this long history, this animosity, this factionalism. Because the cost of not doing so is literally costing people their lives around the country. It's dividing us. It's making us weaker. It's giving our adversaries and foreign competition significant advantages. And it could lead to the end of the American age. I don't want to see that happen. What I do want to see happen is a world in which our leaders approach leadership with these core principles in mind, where everyone knows that if you are looking at someone who is standing for election from the Redbirds or the Bluebirds, that they have committed to these ideas, whether they are inherently themselves conservative or inherently themselves progressive. We can talk about the nuances here. We can get to policies and we can make compromises that make things better for the people. These opportunities exist. They are only foreclosed to us right now because of the system we have built. And we can change that. We can build something new. A key part of this is recognizing that it can't just be political. We have to recover from much of the division and factionalism and polarization and divisiveness that has been built up over the last 50 years of living in this reality. And that's why a core part of this is that there exists an alliance, probably as a non-profit entity. We'll think about that as we proceed. But there exists an alliance that is a non-political arm in which both of these parties operate and are connected. What's the alliance do? The alliance does good work. What kind of good work? Right now, just down the road from me, there's a fair going on, and there's a fantastic community organization. They're selling chicken dinners, and they're using that to feed the hungry. That's fantastic, right? We need more of that. You can imagine that there are neighborhoods out there that have parks that could be rebuilt. There are folks out there who in senior centers who are lonely. There are folks out there who have, homes that could use work. Seniors who can't get to maintenance, things along those lines. What does the Alliance do? The Alliance does things like that. The Alliance organizes softball tournaments in which Redbirds can play Bluebirds, or maybe they create mixed teams, right? The Alliance gets out into the community and holds, reading sessions. The Alliance actually educates anyone who wants it on how to better become active in the system, fill some of the gaps in that civic education hole. Maybe the Alliance organizes things like training and vocational education, in which older folks who have retired and or have certain skills can help train younger folks in those skills, so that not only don't those skills die, but those younger folks have a leg up on building a life for themselves. The Alliance does good work. In addition, the Alliance acts as the central body through which the two parties are held accountable. The Redbirds and the Bluebirds will have lines in their party charters that say you can't change the rules of any one party unless the other party changes its rules too. Lock them together, anchored in principle, and change the way we do things. Unlike places in which changing your party over or strategic voting disincentivizes shifting parties, these two parties could, and I believe will, displace both of the current parties, because they offer us a familiar enough structure that we understand it. But in many ways, what they're giving us is what we should have had all along. It is not a return to some previous and unheralded greatness. It's finally achieving what we always should have had. Politics governed by reason. Leaders structured in service. Consequences, including removal from the ballot, for people who violate the trust of the American citizens. Restrictions on the influence of special interests. I like the idea that if a massive corporation or a massive individual interest wants to throw money into politics, they can't give it to a candidate, but maybe they can give it to the Alliance, right? Maybe you can donate a whole bunch of money to the Alliance, because the Alliance is not going to spend it on political advertising or on misinformation campaigns. The Alliance is going to put it out into the community. You want to show us collectively that your business is interested in doing good and that we should listen to what you have to say in terms of policy? Great. Help us build the playgrounds. Feed the hungry. Put your money into doing good. Then we'll listen to what you have to say. Of course, listening is an easy thing to do, right? I think one of the constrictions on the Alliance candidates and on the party conduct is that our communications should be public. Transparency should happen. Yeah, you want to sit down and have a conversation with an Alliance candidate or an elected person from the Alliance? That's fine. Just understand that the voters get to know what you said. Shouldn't they? Shouldn't we? If we hire someone for the purpose of representing our interests, and a group wants to go to that person and say, hey, we want you to do this, shouldn't we know what's going on in those rooms? I think we should. Because I think there's a huge and important role that advocacy plays. If I have a sincere interest, I should not be afraid of having that interest shared with the public. I should be able to go to my representative and say, hey, look, I'm really concerned about this. I would like you to do this differently. Under what circumstances would that be problematic? Well, sometimes it's when you're asking for something that you don't want to be known for, or when you're asking for something that really serves you and not everybody you say it's going to serve. Transparency is one of those values. We can create a system in which we have these two new parties, in which candidates who approach them and who are standing for election with them are vetted by the parties themselves. I'm imagining a scenario, a system in which that candidates who wish to stand for election submit their application to the parties themselves. Members of the party, perhaps even members of the alliance, review them, give an advisory opinion as to whether or not they have upheld the party values. If they have, the party itself releases a list of qualified candidates. If you want to run for the party nomination, you do so. That election, I'm imagining, will be probably short. We're going to make it like 60 days. There will be requirements as to you have to show up and you have to engage in conversations. You've got a debate. There's a list of questions that you have to answer in order to move forward with your candidacy, so that voters and the people can know where you stand on these crucial issues. What are your ideas? What are your qualifications? And then at the end of those 60 days, we can have a partisan primary. Maybe run it like a caucus the way Iowa does. Maybe it's a closed partisan vote. We have the ability as a party to set many of those rules. Now, some of them will run into state laws and things like that we'll have to account for. But we have the ability to set those things up. And then when our candidates move forward to a general election, we can make a stark contrast with this new crop of political leaders and with everything that has come before. And if we're successful, then we will gain the ability, the leverage, to change some of those other systemic things that have so otherwise crippled our political process. Then things like ranked choice voting become options. Then things like better rules and better policies governing the way money can influence any kind of politics become optional. Now, our parties won't necessarily need them. They'll already have these built in. But then we have the leverage necessary to make the kind of major sweeping changes, to recenter American politics on actual policy, on doing good for the people, on making real and substantive change where necessary, and on preserving important institutions and ideas where appropriate. There's one more thing I want to say about all of this. It's a moonshot, right? It is an absolute moonshot. But the moonshot landed. We got there. If we move on this, it will get harder and encounter more resistance the further we go. If we move on this, it will at first be written off as a joke, as a laughable kind of thing. Eventually, it might start being seen as a curiosity. Later, it will be a threat. And at some point in time, people will come for us, right? Now, I don't expect that to be immediate violence, though that's not off the table. What I do expect is that there will be folks who want to diminish this and demean it because it threatens their connection to and ability to wield power. We have to be ready for that. We have to be ready for the fact that this is not going to exist in a vacuum, that there's lots of other stuff going out there in the world right now, lots of other stuff going on in this country, lots of other things, moving parts, changes. We can't pretend like those don't exist. We have to continue to be diligent and vigilant in our observation of those things and our taking action to impact them. But if we want real and substantive change to exist, if we want the possibility to reshape American politics. We need to make this kind of a change. So what does it look like on the other side? Let's think about that. Imagine for a moment that this is the new standard in politics. Primary elections are 60 days long. There's not political advertisements blanketing everywhere else, right? Civic education is prioritized. It's prioritized at every level. People are, in a nonpartisan, non-ideological way, taught how to interact with the system, how to read and understand policy and legislation. We, hearing through the party and through the alliance, are spending time together with each other in our communities, doing good works, understanding that, yes, maybe, Joe across the street and I have very, very different opinions on firearms, but at the end of the day, we both simultaneously want fewer firearm deaths and crimes, and also respect the idea of people being able to own and possess guns for hunting and trap shooting or wherever else they want to use them for, right? Maybe we both have differing ideas on the economics, but all of us have come around to the general position that no one deserves to be hungry and that we want the opportunity for businesses to succeed and to grow and to offer us all sorts of interesting products and ideas. We get back to a point in which we remember that not only are all of us, in our desire to be safe, and our desire to be prosperous, and our desire to be heard, and our desire to be connected, not only are all of us the same, but we are all in this together. No electoral victory, be it long-term or short-term, erases the fact that people who disagree with you live in your town, on your block, sometimes even in your house. We can reset this. We can rebuild this. But we have to take this kind of emboldened and decisive action to do it. We have to commit to these principles. We have to commit to each other. We have to build it. We have to fight against all of the inertia and all of the animosity and all of the jaded and sarcastic kind of caustic, acidic commentary that we will inevitably endure. You have to fight back against, folks who understand that this would be potentially a threat to their political ambitions and career, against interests who might not get the same special treatment in a system that is designed to actually be accountable to the people as they are getting in the system that we have currently. It's going to be hard, and it's going to be all uphill. And I want to make sure we all understand that. I think we can do it, and I think we need to. I don't think, for some of us, especially geeky political scientists like me, politics will ever be boring. But it can be competent. It can be accessible. It can be helpful. It can be peaceful. And it needs to be. So, what are the next steps? Well, this needs to be more than me. I have, limited time, limited talent. I'm making this video, but this could be better. We need to amplify the message. We need to get organized. We would need to have folks who can do things like research all of the different requirements that exist across the country and help to organize state branches of these parties. We'll eventually need folks who can help us with legal issues, but we're also going to need folks who can start doing things like social media and graphic design, and maybe even starting to organize some of the first real alliance events. If we do nothing other than start getting people in the right places and getting them talking to each other in these first initial moments, that's going to help. That's going to be important. Who's capable of contributing to this? Well, at different stages, different folks, but eventually everybody could have a place in this. Are you somebody who is very, very passionate about politics and knowledgeable? Maybe you are the next candidate for one of these offices. Are you somebody who maybe doesn't want to run, but you know this stuff? Well, maybe you help You either sit in the alliance and you help develop candidates, or you're one of those folks who is looking around the community for folks who are smart and talented and compassionate and motivated on either side of our existing political spectrum, and you're going up to them and going, hey, we'd like you to run. Let me show you how. Maybe you're somebody who's really good with kids, and so what you're going to do is you're going to help create different ways in which core civic education lessons can start way earlier than that one semester in the senior year of high school. Maybe you're just good at baking, right? And so you're going to run with Alliance Bake Sales and bring people together. Maybe you can teach folks gardening so that folks in their little bluebird shirts and their redbird shirts can show up and you guys can work on a community garden together, making the place you live more beautiful, connecting with each other as you do, reminding yourselves that civic participation, that citizenship, that politics doesn't just have to be about throwing mud. It can be about building communities. It can be about making things better. Maybe you're engaging in a conversation hour that's held at a regular spot at a coffee shop or a watering hole, which you bring folks together and the idea that, hey, let's talk about this stuff, right? Let's talk about why we believe the things we believe and how we can, move the country forward. And I know that there are folks whose hearts are hardened. Folks who don't believe this kind of thing is possible, or maybe folks whose own elements of hate or bias would see this as less desirable than what we have now. I hope some of those hearts can soften. But we need a system that serves all of us. And I think that we have the capacity to build it. So, what do I need from you in the short term? I need to find out who's in. Many of you responded to my initial post with ideas that you were in, but now that you've heard what this is, you've got an idea of what it would take to build it. We need bodies, right? We need hands, we need minds, we need keyboards. I mean, eventually we'll need dollars, but that's actually not where we need to start. We need to spread this message. We need to refine this message. I need folks who are good at making videos and good at making documents, and folks who are good at broadcasting and all those different things. If we're actually going to do this, that's what we need. We need people energy. And you don't have to be inherently political to participate. Right? There will be times for folks to knock doors and share posts and spread the word or hand out flyers. And there'll be time for folks to, create things online. We're going to need websites. We're going to need eventually, low dollar person-to-person fundraising mechanisms. There's going to be lots of stuff that's going to be necessary. There's going to be work almost everyone can do, whether it's specifically partisan work and it's about ballot access, which will be one of the first challenges, or if it's more about, the alliance work and using the alliance as a vehicle to show everyone not only what we're about in these two new parties, but what it is that they can accomplish together. So that's it. That's the rundown. This was a bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I think I got most of what I needed to get into it. There will potentially be more, and again, this is the first version of this. Ideally, what we would probably do is get some folks who are better with video and better with production, and we would refine this and we would kind of increase its accessibility, maybe break it into chunks and ways that make sense, and get it out to the broader masses as the movement hopefully grows. There will come a time where if we start working with money, we're going to need to get registered with the FEC. There's all sorts of things that go up in there. Having folks who have political or legal experience will be useful in that capacity. And then, of course, we're going to need folks who are ready to step up. Folks who are willing to say, yeah, I have not been involved previously. I'm not, otherwise I haven't held office before, but I'm ready to step up and be the first redbird or bluebird candidate for my community. I want to throw my hat in the ring and help with that process, right? That's going to be part of it. I think the first big milestone we're going to need is we need to start looking at organizing a convention. That is important for many of the different partisan structures and terms of the way that parties operate within the United States. It'd be silly to organize it today because, who would show up? It'd be me and the cat you saw earlier. But once we get to a certain head of steam, we need to look at scheduling and preparing a convention. We need to start looking at having individual versions of these parties within the states. Figuring out who's going to be a partisan actor and maybe who's going to be part of the alliance. So there's a lot of work to do. And I won't lie, part of me always, because that's who I am, wants to and let me do it all myself and give it to you. But this can't be me, right? I could drown in my river out here tomorrow, right? It can't be me. This can't be David's thing. David's thing is not sufficient to make the changes necessary. It needs to be something that we all take collective ownership of, that becomes a American thing. So now is the time for folks to start getting involved. I'm happy to provide what counsel and leadership that I can and that people are willing to accept. But this will need to very, 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 very quickly grow beyond me if it is going to succeed. Now that said, it also can't grow so far beyond us and us that it gets perverted, right? Because that will be another realistic threat to this process, is that individuals who have strongly different visions, or maybe are simply trying to prevent it from coming to pass, kind of come in and try to turn it into something else. That needs to be resisted. But there needs to be room at the table for any good faith engagement from folks who are trying to align behind this. So I would say this. If you're seeing this video, feel free to share it, by all means. Don't hesitate. Communicate with me via social media, or it's just davidmtakitaki@gmail. Let me know that you're out there, that you're interested, that you're willing. As we get some heads of steam, if we get heads of steam, right, I have to acknowledge the possibility that I put this out into the world and everybody kind of goes, meh, no, and moves on. Okay, that's fine. I tried. I'm hoping, though, that it does get a head of steam. And we can kind of figure out the process from there. So, thank you for your kind attention. And we will hopefully see you soon in the new alliance for our new America. Thanks for watching.